Hi everyone. In this video I want to talk about the different types of errors that I make and all of us make in a chess game. And maybe if we acknowledge these different types of errors and talk about them out loud, it will help us prevent making these mistakes in the future. So in the position shown, I'm black. I'm playing against level 5 stockfish. It's a 15-minute game with a 15-second increment. So I have a lot more time than I normally have in a blitz game. All right, I played c takes d4, attacking the knight. Okay, and Stockfish plays this Zwischenzug, knight takes g6. Zwischenzug is an in-between move. You're expecting a recapture here, queen takes d4, but white plays knight takes g6 instead. And so now I have to recover a piece. Both knights are hanging. I take the knight on g6 since it is attacking the rook in the corner. And now white needs to do something about his knight on c3. And I was expecting queen takes d4. And then I would get a tempo on the queen with knight to c6. But white makes a mistake and plays knight to a5. All right, I don't want to focus on white's mistakes in this game. I want to focus on my mistakes. I was black. And I just want to talk about the different types of mistakes you could make. And the first type I want to talk about is called a quiescence error. I'm borrowing this terminology from Dan Heisman, who has an excellent chess YouTube channel. I think the terminology is also used by computer programmers of chess engines. So a quiescence error means that you stop calculating a line too early before the position quiets down. And so, for example, suppose you're black and you decide to look at various moves and you quickly discard knight takes g4. You say that's no good because h takes g4 and I lose out on that trade. If you stop analyzing there, then you've committed a quiescence error because the position is not yet quiet. These rooks are facing each other. Okay, black can actually go up material by taking the rook on h1. So stopping a line too early while there's still action in the position is a quiescence error. However, knight takes g4 is actually not the best move in the position. The engine suggests that e3 is a good response, attacking the knight with the queen and attacking the pawn on d4. Even though black is ahead here, he does have a strong advantage no matter what white does, since the move knight to a4 was a mistake. Okay, I chose the move e5 to bolster the center. I couldn't resist getting this huge pawn center here, but I made a mistake. The engine says that queen to a5 check is the best move. Now let's talk about what kind of mistake I made. I did consider the move, and I did realize that it forked the king and the knight. And I asked myself, how would white be able to save the material? And I realized, oh, white has the move c3, and the queen defends the knight. Then I asked myself, what do I do from here? And I just looked at it too shallowly. I just looked at d takes c3, knight takes c3, and I said, okay, white's safe. Even if I attack the pinned knight, which flashed through my mind, white can just grab that pawn. All right, so what's the type of error I'm making here? Well, the type of error I'm making is I'm simply not considering all threats, captures, and checks in the position. At every move in a chess game, every single time it's your turn to move, you should consider literally every capture in the position, every check in the position, and every threat in the position. A threat means you're attacking a piece, threatening to win material. So, for example, in this position, here are the bare minimum moves that black should be considering. All threats, captures, and checks. So that includes knight takes g4, that should be considered. D takes c3 should be considered. Queen takes a4 should be considered. Probably quickly discard it because of queen takes a4 in response. Queen takes c3, check should be considered. Some of these you're going to discard in a split second because of b takes c3. But maybe even take a few more seconds than a split second. Maybe really think hard about it. So I think those are the only moves, the types of moves that ran through my mind, but there is a threat I could have made in the position that I just didn't consider, which is the move b5, threatening the knight, okay, threatening to win the knight. So what could white do about this? Well, the only safe square for the knight is on c5. I would have to consider other things too, like counterattacks, like perhaps the move b4 is a possibility, although queen takes a4 would be a good response to that. But there are a lot of things to consider. But this is the only safe square for the knight. Okay, then I can try d takes c3. It's a capturing move, and it looks very threatening because now I'm threatening c takes b2, check. Okay, can white save himself? He can save his knight with b4, drawing the queen up, and then attacking it with knight to d3. So now if the pawn moves forward to c2 with a check, the knight captures the queen. However, I can simply drop the queen back to a5, and I didn't win the knight, but if you count, I won 3 pawns in that line, and the engine says the score is negative 5.0. So I simply didn't look at enough moves in that particular line, queen to a5 check. And that's a difficult thing. It's not that I didn't look at enough candidate moves in my current position. It's that I didn't look at enough candidate moves in the resulting position after one of my candidate moves. I didn't look at the threat b5 here. Let's continue though. So I played e5, and Stockfish played c3 at this point. And now I commit the same mistake, not looking at all captures, threats, and checks. Okay. I played knight to c6 to defend d4, expecting c takes d4 to be, I have my reply ready with knight takes d4, keeping a really strong center. Okay, well, what capture, threat, or check did I miss? There's still this capture to consider, okay, since the pawn is pinned on h3. But again, I missed this move b5. And after white just played c3, there's just no way to save this knight. This square is now covered by the bishop. There's no safe square for that knight. b5 just wins material, and I missed it. So again, literally in a game of chess, every time it's your move, you have to consider every single threat, capture, and check at the minimum. Sometimes you make quiet moves, sometimes you make positional moves, maneuvering ideas, but you have to at least consider those 3 types of moves every single time. And if you tell yourself, I don't have time to do that because my clock is ticking, well, then play a longer time control, because you're just not playing chess. You're not playing real chess if you don't consider all of your captures, threats, and checks. Okay, so I play knight c6, and I just want to forward way ahead here in the game and talk about one more type of error I made. Okay, in this position, white played king to d3, and I realized he is attacking my pawn on d4 twice, once with his king, once with his pawn. It's defended only once. I considered possibly defending it with rook to d8, but I quickly settled on giving up a pawn in order to take this pawn on a4. But that's a mistake. That's a big mistake. Why is that a mistake? What kind of a mistake is that? Well, another thing you have to do every single time you're about to make a move, as soon as you decide on what your move is, you have to ask yourself, is it safe? Is the move safe? And how do you tell if it's safe? Well, what are your opponent's possible responses? What kinds of moves can your opponent make, including all captures, threats, and checks? Well, if I would have taken the time to ask myself, is the move safe? What are the possible forcing replies, checks, captures, and threats? Then I would have obviously seen bishop to c6, which is both a check and a threat. And that's what happened in the game. And I dropped the knight. Okay. So instead of taking that pawn, I probably should have played rook to d8 to defend the d4 pawn. And then maybe the line could have continued e takes d4, e takes d4, maybe rook to b4 to attack that pawn again. Now a good move here would be king to f7 to get the king off of that diagonal where the bishop was checking it in that line, and to connect the rooks so that if white does take the pawn on d4 with the rook, then now I can play knight takes a4 because there's no bishop to c6 check, and the rook is pinned. It can't take the knight. So that would have been a great way to play. I would have been up two connected passed pawns, but instead I dropped a whole piece. Let's take a look at another game. Okay, in this game I'm playing a human being, or I suppose I'm playing a human being on Lichess. Classical time control, 30 minutes, 0 increment. My opponent is rated 2261. I have the black pieces. I played the Sicilian defense, and we go into a Sveshnikov variation here with e5. Okay, and we follow theory. I'm just going to quickly go through the opening. This is all mainline theory in the Sveshnikov. Now the Sveshnikov revolves around that big hole on d5 in black's position. White tries to keep control of that hole, and black would try to push d5 if possible and get rid of that hole. Okay, this is still theory. c4 is not the most common move here. c3 is, but I was aware of the move c4, and I did know some theory here. b4, knight c2, a5 to support the b4 pawn. g3 is the main move, castle, main move, bishop g2, bishop g5 to preserve the bishop pair is the main move, castle, and now I think most players play knight to e7 here. I played bishop d6, a secondary move, and that's where we left opening theory after my opponent's next move. Okay, my opponent played b3, and I start piling up on the d5 square. So notice my light square bishop and my knight are both pointed at d5 now. He plays knight to c3 to support d5 further, so now we have a battle over that square. I decide to remove that knight at the cost of the bishop pair. Knight takes e3 in return. Rook to a7. Here I'm just getting the rook off of the diagonal that the light square bishop is on, and I'm also possibly rerouting the rook to d7 to support this pawn, or even support pushing that pawn. Queen to d2 connects the rooks, and now this pawn is very weak. It's called a backward pawn. It doesn't have any friendly pawns to support it, and white can pile up on it. White can place one of his rooks on d1 and start attacking it, which is why my next move is a mistake. f5. That's a big mistake. The engine says this position is exactly equal right now, but after f5 it gives white a 1.7 advantage. So what kind of a mistake is this? Well, I think it's a mistake of misevaluating the position. Sometimes you analyze correctly, you calculate your lines correctly, you don't miss any captures, threats, or checks. You do check to see if your moves are safe, but you just misevaluate the position, meaning that you think it's better than it is, or you think it's worse than it is. In this case, the reasons I think that f5 is a positionally bad move, a mistake, is because it allows e takes f5, bringing this bishop to life on this diagonal. And it's going to make it harder to support this pawn. For example, one of the moves I had planned was rook to d7. But if I'm going to let white open up that diagonal, then the move bishop to c6 can come into play if this knight isn't here to defend it. So I think the reason I played f5 is because I'm trying to break white's powerful grip on the d5 square. Those two pawns are supporting that square, and so I figured I might as well try to knock one of them down. But it's just not worth giving a huge scope to that light squared bishop. So that's a mistake that's very hard to fix. You just need to learn more chess, play more games, watch more master games, read more analysis, read more chess books until you get better at evaluating positions. All right, my opponent does play correctly. E takes f5 to open the diagonal. I play bishop takes f5. Rook to d1 does hit the pawn on the backward pawn on d6. Rook to d7 to protect it as I had planned. Knight takes f5, excellent move. And now here I make another mistake. Going back to the theme of is it safe? I make the mistake of playing rook takes f5 without asking myself, is that a safe move? And it is not because of my opponent's reply, bishop to h3. I should anticipate all threats, captures, and checks, and that's a simple threat to anticipate. Both my rooks are on that diagonal, so I'm going to lose the exchange after that move. Why did I make that move instead of capturing with the knight? Well, that's another mistake. Okay, so the last type of mistake I want to talk about is miscalculations. Miscalculations mean that you're envisioning a line of play in your mind, but you don't clearly see what squares all the pieces are on. You forget that a piece is defending something or not defending something. You forget that it is moved. You don't see the position clearly in your mind. That's a miscalculation. And the reason I discarded knight takes f5, which was a much better move, is because I told myself bishop to c6 would come. I would have to move the rook, and then the queen could take the pawn. Well, that's obviously incorrect because the knight is defending the pawn, and I just did not see that when I was looking at this position. I did not clearly see that knight on f5 defending that d6 pawn. So I made a miscalculation. That would have been a better move. Knight takes f5 here, although white still has a good advantage. I don't think bishop to c6 is the best move, but white does still have an advantage here. Okay, so those are the different types of mistakes: quiescence errors, failing to consider all of the attacks, captures, and checks, failing to ask yourself, is the move safe? Evaluating a position wrong, thinking it's better or worse than it actually is, and miscalculating. Those are all things you have to work on. All right, thanks for watching the video.